serve the American people the best, and we've come to a consensus about a change in behavior, which I believe in the end will be more important than the change in the rules. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from New Mexico.
Madam President, I have a couple of unanimous consent requests on committees and also on a staff member. I have 5 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
And I also ask unanimous consent for Tim Woodbury on my staff be granted floor privileges for today's debate.
Without objection.
And before Senator Alexander leaves, I know we have our conferences, and I guess we're going to go to about one today, but I'd like to thank him for all of his efforts, and I really look forward to Senator Alexander being the ranking member. I believe he's going to be the ranking member on the Rules Committee now that Bob Bennett has moved on to other things, and he's participated in many of these hearings, and I really look forward to continuing the exchange on rules that we've had. I don't think this is the end of the rules debate, and I think that's why we have a full-time Rules Committee to take a look at this, and I hope these new senators that are listening to us today that you're going to talk to on your side, I'm sure in about 15 minutes, Senator Alexander, that they look at our rules and offer suggestions, and we still continue this discussion in the Rules Committee. And I want to thank all of the leaders that came down here today and talked. Senator Reid and Senator McConnell, they've announced an agreement. We're moving forward with reforms. Senator Schumer has been a real champion on rules reform. I remember going to him and asking for hearings. And he said, well, what kind of hearings are we looking at, and what do we want to do? And I explained to him, went through, we need to talk about the history of the filibuster. You know, the filibuster was not in the original Senate. There were rules for 17 years where you had what was called a motion to order the previous question. That is a majority motion to cut off debate. And then later it was changed. And so I said, we've got to get the history out there for everybody to see, because some of these charges are not very accurate. And he was a champion. He allowed us to do 6 hearings. We brought in constitutional scholars. Both sides participated, and it was very, very productive. So here we are at the beginning of a Congress, and we have been pressing with my good colleague and friend from Oregon, pressing for rules reform through the Constitution, relying on the Constitution. In Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution, it gives us the power and the authority, a majority of us at the beginning of an organizing session, to determine what rules we function under the next 2 years. And that's the exercise that we have been in. And Senator Merkley, one of the things I want to say to you that I think both of us realize is that we know that if we hadn't utilized our rights under the Constitution, if we hadn't pushed this very hard and said, we are trying to round up 51 senators that will stand up with us and say, we want change in this institution. We want to get back to being the greatest deliberative body. We want to consider all the important bills in a timely way, budget bills, appropriations bills. And I think by utilizing our constitutional option or our rights under the Constitution, we have come a long way in a year. And we've had many debates in our caucus. We've had many discussions. But the one point I want to make, we're not exactly where I think you and I think we should be at this particular point in time. Because while these reforms, and let me say that these reforms, I think, are steps forward and in some ways significant. The fact that we're getting rid of secret holds, if we have that vote today and get 60 votes, that's a good thing. The nominations, letting the President get his team in place, that's a good thing. Reading of amendments, my cousin Mark Udall from Colorado is involved with that. The motion to proceed, the gentleman's agreement on the motion to proceed and in filling the tree, that is a significant step in behavior to say let's change our behavior. And then the fact that we're going to have votes today, later today, on Senate Resolution 10, on Senator Merkley's talking filibuster, on Senator Harkin's proposal. These are significant votes to be taken and significant steps forward. But I have to tell you that and that's what I wanted to focus and for you and I to talk about, Senator Merkley. I strongly disagree with one thing that was announced here, with the idea that the two leaders are taking off the table us utilizing our constitutional rights. I mean, that was what was announced, and I think we both heard it the same way. Leader McConnell and Leader Reid, they both said that they are not going to rely on a majority vote for rules in the future, no matter who's in power and what's happening. Well, the beauty of the Constitution, and I think we all realize this, spending some time with it, is that that's a good agreement for them. It doesn't apply to 98 other senators. Each senator under the Constitution has his or her right to rely on those constitutional rights. And so I would urge, like has been done every time in the past when we've had a movement for change on rules, that it be bipartisan, and that we're seeking 51 senators that will join with us, because if 51 senators join at the beginning of a Congress and say, we want rules reform, we want this place to function better, we want to do the people's works better, we want to take up some of those House bills, the 400 bills that died, we want to do appropriations bills in a timely way. All of these things are very important to a better functioning Senate, and really a better functioning Senate is all about the people's work. So I thought that for the last couple of minutes here, I know you want to say some initial comments, Senator Merkley, but we could talk about this idea that we've moved a long way, we've pushed the constitutional option. I don't think there's any doubt that you and I are giving up on our constitutional rights. Other senators can say what they want to do, but we are going to stand and utilize our rights as we move down the road. And we're hoping that we will be at a place where we have 51 senators, Democrats and Republicans, that are going to continue to look at this and find a better way to make this institution work in terms of modern issues, modern times. I think we're kind of stuck back in another century with some of these rules, and we really need to bring it up to date. And with that, Senator Merkley, you and I think, are going to engage in a little bit of a colloquy, but I know you had some initial comments, and happy to let you jump in at this point.
Mr. President,
and I yield.
Madam President.
Senator from Oregon.
Thank you, Madam President, and a huge thanks to my colleague from New Mexico for his leadership on the constitutional option. Some may ponder how it is that we come to have this constitutional argument at this moment. And as you have noted, under the Constitution, this body is empowered to organize itself. And that is not that those who spoke 100 years ago or 50 years ago get to tell us how to operate, but that we today in this chamber have the power in the Constitution to organize ourselves. There is little question from constitutional scholars about this understanding of the very plain words written by our forefathers as they designed this institution. Indeed, they were very clear, the authors of the Constitution, when supermajority requirements were set. Supermajority for overriding a presidential veto. Supermajority for impeachment. Supermajority for treaties. But a simple majority to pass bills. A simple majority to pass amendments. A simple majority to adopt the rules by which we would function. And indeed, that's exactly what the first Congress did. They used a simple majority to adopt their rules. And they extended to each other a courtesy to hear each other out, those 26 senators coming from 13 states. They heard each other out so that they could make better decisions. Now, over time, that courtesy has grown to be informally entrenched in a Senate rule that says shutting down debate takes a supermajority. But when that was done, it went hand in hand with a social contract to understand that such power for one senator to shut down this body, require a supermajority, delay action for a week, would be a power rarely used, a power used in courtesy and respect to the other members that would only be used for the most important issues, the highest issues of highest concern to one's particular state or to the future of this nation. But that social contract is what has disappeared, that went hand in hand with the rule, with the supermajority. And let me put up a simple chart here to show the deterioration of that social contract. So here we are with the average number of cloture motions, that's the shutdown debate filed, and the average in 1900 to 1970 was 1 per year. And in the 1970s, 16. And you can see how this grows over time till in the 1990s we were at 36, in the 2000s at 48, and in this last 2 years, 68 per year. This is the change from the courtesy of hearing each other out to using a supermajority as an instrument of legislative destruction to blockade good debate, to blockade the will of the majority, to blockade and paralyze the Senate as a whole. So, recognizing this damage that meant that no appropriation bills were adopted last year, that no budget was adopted, that 400 House bills lay collecting dust on the floor rather than being processed and voted on, that more than 100 nominations were never acted on, and that we failed in our constitutional duty to advise and consent. It's in recognizing all of that, and it's particularly apparent as new members of the body observing this, that something had to be done. And that is why I was so impressed when you stepped forward, Senator Udall, and said, we will use the power of the Constitution to help restore the broken Senate. And it's been a privilege and an honor to team up with you and to team up with many of our members in this effort. So we come to this point today where, as my colleague mentioned, there's a number of steps forward that are coming out of this debate. But they are modest steps forward. Some of them are ones that have been debated for years. I applaud Senator Wyden from my state, who worked with Senator Grassley and Senator McCaskill on secret holds. As Senator Wyden likes to note, 15 years he's argued we shouldn't be able to put a hold on legislation without taking public responsibility for 15 years, really since he came in to the Senate. And he's absolutely right. And today, I think a supermajority will adopt that. And these other steps forward, not abusing the reading of amendments, reducing the number of folks who are subject to confirmation, they're steps forward. But I'd like you to envision 3 60-foot high walls between where you are now and where you need to be to have the Senate work as a body that debates legislation and votes on legislation. The first 60-foot wall is cloture on the motion to proceed. The next 60-foot wall is cloture on an amendment, and actually there can be any number of those. And the third 60-foot wall is final passage, closing down debate for final passage. And so in this agreement today, there has been a sense between the leaders that the motion to proceed will not be filibustered. That's the first wall. So that's being taken down, or at least a commitment not to use it except in extraordinary circumstances. But that means there's 2 more major walls left in place. And I step back from that and ask, how much will it really change for the Senate? Because if I go back to this chart, we have the first wall is one that's only been occasionally used. It's the second and third wall that are the main thing driving these numbers, driving the paralysis of the Senate. So I hope, indeed, that when the majority-minority leader talk about changing behavior, when my good friend from Tennessee, Lamar Alexander, talks about changing behavior, I hope they're talking about restoring the social contract, that the filibuster would rarely be used, because that would be a tremendous step forward. And so I will hold out that promise, meanwhile recognizing that it will only happen when a senator comes forward and does a frivolous effort to continue debate on an amendment or a bill or a nomination that's overwhelmingly supported, that it will be up to leadership to say, that's not acceptable. We need to restore the social contract. And if that change in behavior happens, that would be a tremendous step. But meanwhile, I echo my colleagues' comments that I cannot surrender the rights under the Constitution to use a majority to continue to pursue rules that will make our broken Senate work better. So I preserve that right as he does. Now, there are many who say the Senate should be different than the House, and the traditional term is it should be a cooling saucer. And in part that was related to the debate and the design of the Constitution when our terms were staggered. So 1/3 of us is elected every 2 years. And so the country may be way over here, and the Senate may change accordingly, but only 1/3 are up for election. And they may be over here, and the Senate changes less. And in addition, this courtesy, this respect of hearing each other out and pondering the arguments each other are making. But a cooling saucer is very different than the routine use of the filibuster to obstruct the ability to act. Very different than the way it's been used this last 2 years to prevent us from doing appropriation bills, to prevent us from doing House bills, to prevent nominations from being considered. That has to end. That has to change. And so I pledge myself to continue working, hoping that behavior will change on its own, but working with others to say when it doesn't change, we need to change the rules to make this institution fulfill its constitutional responsibilities. We're going to be breaking soon, and when we come back, I hope to resume a conversation about some of the specific items we'll be voting on later today. The one I particularly want to talk about is the Jimmy Stewart or talking filibuster. It's a compromise that takes into account the desire that we hear each other out, the desire that we be a cooling saucer, but that we hear each other out, the desire that we be a cooling saucer, but prevents an opportunity to be accountable to the public, not to have the silent or secret filibuster we have now, but to have the public and talking filibuster where we actually debate. So I'll say more about that when we come back, and I'll just close, Madam President, by thanking all of those who have been in this conversation. Certainly Lamar Alexander from the Republican Party and Chuck Schumer, who has been working so hard, both of them on rules, to hold hearings, to craft structure, for our leadership, our majority leader, Harry Reid, and our minority leader, Mitch Connell, who have been in this conversation that has resulted in these steps forward that we're taking today, and applaud all of the members who have said that as a U.S. Senator sworn to uphold the Constitution, they have an obligation to make the Senate a great deliberative body, something it once was, something it is not now, but something that is in our hands to make happen again. Thank you, Madam President.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands in recess until 2:15 p.m.
Shortly before